Hello everyone, Mr. Love here, coming to you from the diesel shop. Today we're going to be doing a pre-trip inspection on this FL60 here. This is one of the test vehicles you might be using for your road test for your Class B license. So this is part of the Class B license road test part. It's a two-part test. First part is the vehicle inspection. Second part is the road course. So we're going to be using the official New York State Commercial Driver's Manual CDL/10. It's made from May of 2022 this year. So we're just going to be following through here step by step, showing you the different components to check on this truck. There are going to be two videos in this series. One's going to be this FL60 here. The other one's going to be the International 4900, the green dump truck that you might also use for your Class B or Class A. So if you're using this truck, check this video out. If you're using the other truck, check out the other video. Let's get started. Inspecting all these, the person that's given the road test and this test here is going to be kind of grading you on doing everything in the correct order. Out in the real world, you're probably not going to do it in this order. You'll find your own routine. Just make sure you do the same routine each day so you know what everything is. So like I said before, right now we're doing section 11.2.1, the engine compartment with the engine off. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to check all the hoses for different leaks and stuff around the vehicle. We're going to look for puddles on the ground under the vehicle. We're going to look for dripping fluids on the underside of the engine and transmission, and we're going to inspect any hoses that we see for leaks. Just going around here, checking for different leaks all around, kind of check every component and every hose. Doesn't really matter what it is. We really shouldn't have any oil or any fluids dripping out of here. So, check fuel lines, check power steering lines, check coolant hoses, check anything that you might see. Give a good check underneath, make sure nothing's dripping onto the ground. Remember, check both sides of the engine compartment, walk all the way around. Don't be afraid to grab a hold of stuff, move it around a little bit. Obviously don't grab the exhaust or anything if it's hot, but even the coolant hoses that are hot should be, cool enough to actually grab with your hand and move around a little bit. So again, we're checking for any sort of leak whatsoever out of all these different hoses or anything in general here. So, check the intake system, make sure no oil's coming out of the turbo or anything. We definitely don't want that. Check all our power steering, check our coolant hoses, just check our fuel, everything that you see here. Okay, everything looks good. Let's go on to the next step. Okay, next step's pretty basic. We're going to be checking the engine oil level here. So remember, the engine is off for these checks here. We're going to pull out the dipstick and wipe it off with our clean rag that we have. Slide it back in there, and we're going to pull it out. So most of our dipsticks are going to have a full mark on it and an add mark on there. So when you're doing this, make sure you let the inspector know that it's above the add mark. If it's below the add mark, we need to add oil to it before we get started. This one here is right at the full mark, so we're good to go. So we'll wipe it off again, and we'll put it back in there, and that step is done. Okay, so our next step here is to check that engine coolant. So this is a very dangerous step if we do it incorrectly. We want to make sure 100% that our engine is cooled off, that it's not hot if we're going to pull out the radiator cap or anything. Most of the expansion tanks will either have a sight glass like this one does right here. Has a little sight glass, you can see the coolant in there. So we see it in there, so we know it's full. Some of the other trucks around here have a transparent tank where you can actually see the coolant level just looking through the side of it here. But on this metal one, you can't see that, so you got to check the sight glass. If this is first thing in the day, we haven't ran this truck yet, we can pull off the radiator cap. So this tank's actually a little warm because I was just out running it around a little bit. So we'll do this slowly to show you, how to do it properly if it's just a little warm. If it's hot to the touch, if you can't hold your hand here for 10 seconds, do not under any circumstance take that cap off. You take that cap off and this is super hot inside here, that coolant's going to flash boil, and a lot of steam and antifreeze is going to come all over us and burn us really bad. So a lot of times, if you touch the tank here and it's cool, but you know it's been running, that could be an indication that you're low on coolant. The best thing to do, make sure the engine's off. You could reach right in and actually touch the radiator itself. Touch the radiator with your hand. If that's nice and cool, and the tank's nice and cool, you're good to take the cap off. Sometimes if our coolant level's low, but our radiator's hot, when we take that cap off, it lets the coolant boil at a lower temperature, and it could flash steam on us that way also. So make sure we always have on our safety glasses if we're going to take the cap off. Make sure we have a rag to put over it. We always put the rag over the cap. Remember, the cap's multiple stages, so we have to push down. We turn just a little bit, let up a little bit. It'll let any pressure out that's in there, and then after the pressure's released, then we're safe to take it out the rest of the way. So always have our rag on there in case there is steam or something in there that starts to come out. We can quickly shut it again. If we don't have the rag on there, we just have our hand on there. And when the steam comes out, it's going to burn us. We're going to pull our hand away, and now all that's going to go in our face. So always have a rag on there, no matter what. I even take cold caps off with a rag just in case. We're going to put it on there. We're just going to slowly turn it to the first lock, let up, see there's no pressure in there. So now we're safe to take it off the rest of the way. So we have our cap off all the way now. Don't lose it. Now we can get up on the side here. As you look down inside here, make sure it's full. Yep, right up to the fullness right in there. Make sure we put our cap back on. Put our cap on. Make sure it's all the way tight on there, and we're done with that step. Okay, our next step here is the power steering fluid. We're going to locate our power steering reservoir here, and we're going to pull out the dipstick on there. Again, some reservoirs are transparent where you've seen them. This one's a metal one, so we got to pull the dipstick out here. So have our rag handy, just like with our engine oil. Pull our dipstick out, wipe it off, screw it back in there, take it out again, and we're going to check the level on there. So just make sure it's above the add mark. Somewhere is, usually in the safe zone here between the add and full is good. This one's a little overfilled, which is still okay for this application, but ideally we'd want it right at the full mark there. Again, we'll wipe it off and put it back in. If you have to add power steering fluid, make sure it's the correct fluid. Every truck uses different fluid. This one here actually uses transmission fluid inside there. Some of them use engine oil, some of them use actual power steering fluid, just by different manufacturers. So make sure that's back in there all the way, and we're on to the next step. Step here is checking the different belts of the engine here. So we definitely want to check the power steering belt, water pump belt, alternator belt, air compressor belt. But also if it has an air conditioner or anything on there, check that belt also, because if that one goes bad, sometimes it'll take out the other belts on there. Some of the components have belts on different trucks that don't have it on this one. Like on our international truck in the other video, the air compressor actually is belt driven. This one here, it's gear driven. So make sure you tell the instructor as you're checking the belt and stuff that this one has a gear driven air compressor and power steering pumps attached to the air compressor. So both the air compressor and power steering are gear driven on this, so you don't have to worry about the belt. So our belt here, we have our AC belt here for our air conditioning. You want to just grab a hold of it, give it a visual inspection. There shouldn't be very much play in it. It should look pretty decent, no cracks or anything. Our serpentine belt, I'm gonna have to reach down inside there a little bit further, grab a hold of that, move it. There shouldn't be much movement to it. You see down in here a little better, we have our actual belts here, serpentine belt. It's gonna be the wider, flatter one. It runs multiple components. This one's running the alternator here. It's going around our fan, running the fan. It's going down around our engine down there. And it's also going around our water pump right here. So we want to check that belt. We want to grab right a hold of it, pull it up and down, kind of twist it around, make sure there's no cracks or anything through this section here. There's a V belt over here. It's usually a little skinnier belt, kind of shaped like a V there. Check that out. Like I said, if this one fails, it could take out this one pretty easily. So check all the belts while you're in there. And remember, tell the instructor, what you're checking and what is belt driven and what is not belt driven. Okay, we're done with the first section here. Now we're gonna move on to some in-cab stuff here. So the in-cab stuff is gonna be section 11.2.2. It's gonna be the cab check and engine start. So for this, we're gonna hop up inside the cab here. Remember, we're gonna use our 3 points of contact to climb up in there. 2 hands and 1 feet, 1 foot, 2 hands, nice and safe getting up in there. I'm up inside the cab here. The first thing it tells me to do is to start the engine. So it tells me to pushing the clutch pedal all the way. I turn the key, it goes to its self-check here. I'm gonna reach over with my shifter here and make sure that's out of gear. Back and forth. I'm gonna start the slowly. It's running. It's telling me to check the different components here. So the first thing is telling me to check the oil pressure gauge. So right here we have our oil pressure gauge. Make sure that it climbs up. Usually anywhere between 20 and 60, 70 is pretty good. Usually if it's below 20, your oil's getting a little blackened or it could be a little low on oil there. So make sure our oil pressure is up there. Next, check our temperature gauge. So our temperature gauge here is about 140 degrees. Like I said, I was running around a little bit earlier. So that's there. As it's running, we should be able to watch our temperature gauge slowly climb there. Our temperature gauge should climb up to about 190 or so. Then the thermostat will open up and you can actually watch the temperature gauge lower down after that if it's the temperature. Okay. Next, we're going to check our air pressure gauge if it's equipped with one. So our road test vehicles are going to have air brakes on it, so you get your air brake endorsement. So we're going to check our air tanks gauges over here, make sure they're both climbing and stuff. There's more checks we got to do with them afterwards. So we have 2 tanks here. We have a primary and secondary tank. Make sure they're up to pressure here, usually between 120 and 140 psi, depending on the manufacturer. Next, we want to check our voltage gauge there. This one doesn't have one, but it doesn't have any lights on the dash. If there's a voltage problem with it or a charging problem with it, there'd be a light on the dash saying there's a malfunction. At this point, we're going to check our mirrors and windshield. We can't have any cracks or chips or anything in our windshield. Make sure our mirrors are good. We'll also inspect them a little bit while we're outside the vehicle. But give a quick little inspection while you're in here. Check all the mirrors. Whatever's on the vehicle, even if it's added on ones like over there, they need to be functional and efficient. Okay, everything looks good there. Our next thing is going to be our emergency equipment. So in our emergency equipment here, we need to have reflectors. We need to have 3 reflective triangles or flares. So 1, 2, 3, we have all them. We'll check down here for our other equipment. There's our fire extinguisher. We want to check our fire extinguisher, make sure the pressure is good on it, and make sure that the age for inspection is within spec. Another thing we have to have that you normally don't think about is extra fuses and stuff. We look down in our cup holder there. We have extra fuses down inside there, inside our mat holder. So you can see here, check for spare electrical fuses, check for 3 red reflective triangles or flares, check for properly charged and rated fire extinguisher. If the vehicle is not equipped with electrical fuses, you must mention that to the examiner. Okay, next we're going to check our steering wheel plate. So either non-power steering ones or with power steering, chances are you're going to be in a vehicle with power steering. Because all modern vehicles have power steering. So with the engine running, we're going to check for excessive play by turning the steering wheel back and forth. The play should not exceed 10 degrees or about 2 inches of play for a 20-inch wheel before the wheel starts to move. The actual tire starts to move. So we're going to look out. We're going to look at our tire a little bit there. We're going to watch our steering wheel. We're going to move it. So you can see the tire starting to move a little bit out there. It's starting to move a little bit. If that's moving, we should have very little play here, not more than 2 inches. So that's within spec, so we're good there. Next, we're going to check our wipers and washers. So this one here is our windshield wipers. They work back and forth. They look good. We'll try our washer here. Yep, it sprays out there, spraying all over the windshield. So that part there is good. Next, we're going to check all our lights. So our lights are a couple of parts, a couple steps here to them. So we're going to first test them inside the cab. They're indicator lights on our dash here. So when we turn on our high beams, we should have a high beam indicator come on. After we turn on the lights, okay, we got our lights on. You can see a high beam indicator there. Turn it on and off, and we turn on our high beams. On this truck here, that's how we turn on our high beams. By looking up on that right there. Okay, next we're going to turn on our left turn signal. We're going to look for our left turn signal indicator. Next, our right turn signal indicator. That works. Next, we're going to turn on our four-way flashers. That's down here on this truck here, underneath where our turn signals are. You'll see this other little thing here. Pull those out, and now they both should be flashing. So they both work. So we did our turn signals, we did our four ways, we did our high beams, and our ABS light if it's equipped with ABS. So if we have ABS, when we first turn it on, this one's not a modern one, but you can see our ABS light should come on where it says tractor ABS, then it should turn right off. The light should not remain on. So as long as it comes on during the self-check and shuts off, we're good there. Next, we're going to check all the external lights and reflective equipment are clean and functional. So now we're actually going to get out of the vehicle with the lights on and do a visual inspection of all the lights. A quick little walk around the vehicle here, checking our headlights. Remember, check the low and high beams. So you'd have to turn on the high beams, make sure they both work on both sides. We're going to check all our clearance lights here, make sure they're all working up on top. Our ICC lights there in the middle, our outside marker lights. Make sure our fender lights on this one are on. Looking good so far. Got our fender one over there. The light there works. Our other clearance lights. Light on the body there works. Lights on the back work. Got our marker lights, got our ICC lights, license plate lights work, tail lights work. Continuing around, our other marker lights, and our other little marker light there. So if there's any added lights to the body, they all need to work on there. So you see those trucks that are running down the road with hundreds of lights, one of them is out, then you have to get it repaired. So any light that's on a vehicle must work. So other things we have to check is our turn signals, brake lights, and backing up lights. So checking those are a little more difficult here because of the, you need someone up in the cab. So ask your instructor to help you out to watch those while you run through them. For this here, I'm just going to set up the camera here, run through our turn signals on the back, and put the brake lights and put it in the reverse. Okay, so make sure your key's on because some of the functions don't work with the key off. We have left turn, right turn, brakes, and reverse. 4 ways. Make sure our reflectors are in good shape here. not cracked or broken. On the rear end, we either need reflective taillights or to have reflectors on there, or both. If there's reflectors, make sure they're in good shape. Good. To check the turn signals and stuff on the front of the vehicle also. Four ways and stuff on. Make sure these are blinking on both sides. Make sure every other light works on the vehicle. We're still going with the in-cab stuff. We got to make sure our horns work. So this one here has a city horn on the steering wheel. That works. Also has an air horn. Got to make sure they both work. Next, we got to check our heater defroster. Make sure our controls work. Make sure our blower motor works. That works good. Make sure it switches over to defrost. Yeah, everything's good there. Next, we got to do our park and brake check. So with the park and brake engaged, so here's our push-pull knob here that releases and applies our park and brake. So our park and brake's applied because that's pulled out right now. We got to start the vehicle and slowly, just gently try to pull away, gently release the clutch. The vehicle should not move at all. So make sure we're in a safe location here to do it. Make sure nobody's around you in either direction, front, sides, anywhere. Make sure it's running. We're going to put it in low gear here. The switcher's in low gear. We're going to just slowly let out on the clutch, just very slowly. The truck should not go anywhere. Okay, so that worked good. We're going to put it back in neutral, make sure it's in neutral, and slowly release the clutch again. Good to go. Okay. There's a hydraulic brake check. It's a pretty simple check, but you should be using a vehicle with air brakes so you don't get any restrictions on your license for your CDL. But if you're going to check the hydraulic brakes, you just pump up the brake pedal 5 times, then hold it down, and it should not go down at all, and the buzzer should not come on. Okay, next is our air brake check here. So this is quite a bit of stuff we have to do here. So I'll just read this section. Failure to perform all 3 components of this air brake check correctly will result in automatic failure of the vehicle inspection test. Air brake safety devices vary. However, this procedure is designed to see that any safety device operates correctly as air pressure drops from normal to low air condition. For safety purposes and in areas where an incline is present, you will use wheel chocks during the air brake check. The proper procedures for inspecting the air brake systems are as follows. So first, we're going to do the static check. We're going to shut off the engine. We're going to chalk our wheels. So we're on a flat surface here, sitting inside the shop, but we should have the wheels chalked. So chalk your wheels. Release the tractor protection valve. So we're going to push in on our yellow PP knob there. And then we're going to fully apply the foot brake valve and hold it for 1 minute. We're going to check our air gauges to see if the air pressure drops more than 3 pounds in 1 minute or 4 pounds in 1 minute for if we have a truck and trailer. This is just a truck, so we're going to make sure it doesn't drop more than 3 pounds in 1 minute. So we have to make sure our key's on for this. Some of our air gauges are going to be electric. These ones are manual ones here, so it doesn't matter on this one, but some of them are electric, so make sure that your key's on anyways, just not running. We're going to push in our PP valve here, releasing our parking brake. Okay, so my foot's off the brake pedal and everything. If I started to roll at this point here, this is where I'd have to put the wheel chocks underneath the vehicle here, or move to a different flatter location to do this test here. Okay, so PP valve is pushed in, brakes are released. I'm just a little over 100 PSI right here. Now I'm going to hold down on my brake pedal here. So I'm going to push it down. Obviously the pressure is going to drop here a little bit. Engine's off, so it's not going to build back up. So we're going to first watch what this drops down to right here. And now we're going to hold down our brake pedal for 1 minute, and we should not be dropping anything here. You should not hear any air leaks or anything at this point. One thing you definitely want to make sure is that you don't move your foot on the brake pedal at all. If you move your foot on the brake pedal, you couldn't release that and it drop down on you, then you'd have to start your test all over again. But say I was sitting here for 1 minute, foot pushed down on the brake pedal, my gauges here should not drop down either gauge. So we look good there. I'm going to release the brake pedal now. Okay, step 2 of the 3-step process here is to check the low air pressure warning devices. So again, we need to have our key on for our alarms to work. So make sure your key is on. And now we're going to just pump the brake pedal a little bit, watching our air gauge go down. As our air gauge goes down around 85 PSI or so, our buzzer and warning light should come on our dash here. So I'm going to pump it down here. Okay, so our warning light's on there. We're right on the cusp of it, so I'll go a little bit lower here. So our warning light's on, stays on. You can hear the buzzer there buzzing away there. Okay, our next step is our tractor protection valve. So our parking brake is still pushed in here, and we're going to continue pushing on our brake pedal there. So as we get to about 35 to 30 PSI, our parking brake knob should pop out on its own, fully applying our parking brakes for us. This is in case if we have a major air leak, our brakes are going to slowly apply as it overcomes the spring pressure. And then we get down low enough that parking brake's going to pop right out, and we're going to stop dead in the road until we get air again to release those parking brakes. That's why it's important that our alarm and lights and everything work, because if we did have an air leak, we want to make sure that we know that it's leaking and we can safely get off the road before our brakes fully apply on us. Okay, so I'm still pumping down here. We're down to about 40 PSI. So you can see our parking brake valve just popped out on us there. And now our parking brakes are fully applied for us. So all those tests worked good. Okay, now we're going to fire up our truck again, and we're going to watch our air pressure build up here. We want to make sure that it builds up nice and gradually. And we want to make sure that it doesn't build up over the specified thing, and we have a nice clean purge when it builds up all the way. Okay, so again, we're going to push in on our clutch. Make sure it's out of gear as always. Start our vehicle. Slowly release our clutch pedal. And we're going to watch it build up here. Then give it a little throttle. But there's not any reason to go over like 1,300 RPMs. Anything over that's just a waste because the air compressor doesn't build up any more rapidly over 1,300 RPMs. So both air gauges are still gradually going up. It's okay if they're not exactly the same speed going up. Some trucks have bigger tanks either on the primary side or secondary side. Usually on the secondary side, the tanks will be bigger. So the primary might build up first, then the secondary one. So when we get up to our governor cutout pressure, usually between 110 and 135 psi. We should hear the air dryer give a nice clean purge, and our air gauge should stop building up. Okay, we just had our nice clean purge there. Both our tanks are at the same. Good to go on that one there. We'll shut our vehicle back off here. And we'll go on to our next step. Okay, our truck is shut off. We just inspected our air system. The last thing to check is the safety belt, our seat belt. We'd usually do this while we're sitting inside the cab, but for demonstration purposes, I'll just pull it out here for you. So we're gonna pull it out as we're sitting in the seat there, and we're just gonna check our seatbelt operation. Make sure it goes in and out good. And we're gonna check for frays and stuff like that. We're also gonna check the buckle part, make sure that it actually locks in all the way to our seatbelt. Make sure it locks in as we're sitting in the seat. Make sure it releases good. If you want to, you give it a quick yank. Make sure that it locks for you at that point. For our first part here, section 11.3.1 is the steering system. First thing it wants us to check is the steering box and hoses. Check that the steering box is securely mounted with no leaks. Look for any missing nuts, bolts, or cotter pins. Check the power steering fluid for leaks or damage to the power steering hoses. So we already checked our power steering fluid in the beginning of the video there. So we know how to do that. We know that it's full already, but we want to check our hoses. So grab our hoses and stuff, move them around a little bit, make sure there's no cracks or frays where it's rubbing or anything. Sometimes you'll have paint on the hoses like this one here, where it looks like it's cracked, but it's actually not cracked, just the paint's peeling off of it there. So maybe note that to the examiner as they're watching you. Show that it's not an actual crack, show that it's just the paint cracking off there. So follow any hoses that you could see. So remember our power steering pump on this one's back here on the back of the air compressor down in here. We have our hose here coming out of our reservoir, going down to our power steering gearbox. We got hoses coming on and out of there. Some trucks will have, when the hoses come out of here, sometimes they go down to little steering assist cylinders down on the axle. And this truck here does not have it, just has the actual gearbox here. Okay, so I don't see any leaks or anything. Check both sides. If it does have steering assist, sometimes the steering assist cylinder is over on the other side. Okay, next we want to check the steering linkage. So we want to see that the connecting links, arms, rods from the steering box to the wheel are not worn or cracked. Check that the joint sockets are not worn or loose, and that there are no missing nuts, bolts, or cotter pins, anything like that. So whenever we're checking our steering system, don't be afraid to grab right a hold of stuff, shake it around. Right here, we have our steering shaft that comes from the cab. Steering wheel's attached to the other end of this shaft right here. A big common wear point here is these U-joints right here. Shouldn't be any play in those. You can usually move it around a little bit like that. That's good to go. Look down here. This component here. So we have our power steering gearbox right here. Coming out of there is the pitman arm. So the pitman arm kind of changes the rotary motion here of our gearbox from our steering wheel, changes it into linear motion, back and forth motion to turn the wheels. So power steering gearbox, then we go to our pitman arm down here. Off our pitman arm, we go to the drag link. Drag link goes all the way back to the steering knuckle here, back here, which rotates the wheel. So this drag link right here rotates this wheel. If you look down here, we have our tie rods. Our tie rod is what's connecting this wheel on this side to the one over on the other side. So we want to check all these components. We want to check the nuts, the bolts, make sure nothing's missing out of them, make sure it has the cotter pin in it if it's a castellated nut like that. Everything looks good here. Like I said, don't be afraid to grab right a hold of this stuff. There shouldn't be any movement in there. You might get a little twisted movement like this, but you shouldn't get any back and forth movement whatsoever. One way I do it during state inspections when I do it on these trucks is I can twist the steering shaft here back and forth, and I shouldn't be able to see the little ball joints here pop at all. Everything looks pretty tight there. Same with our tie rods down there. Has a castellated nut on there on the tie rod ends. We want to make sure that's good. Make sure our tie rod's good. Remember, check both sides. We're going to go over to the other side real quick. Okay. All we have on this side is the tie rod. We don't have any drag link or steering gearbox or anything like that. Some vehicles will have multiple gearboxes and stuff like that. If it does, check them both. Real quick over here in our shop here. Here's one of our garbage trucks we cut down. This is an International 4700, I believe it was. So you can see this one here has first thing we notice, it has a transparent power steering thing. We can see the power steering levels there. Also does have a dipstick in the top if we needed to pull it out. This one here is kind of unique because it has two gearboxes on it. So this power steering gearbox here, this is where the shaft would come in from the steering wheel, come into this one here. So check our reservoir here, check our drag link, check our pitman arm, all that stuff on this side, tie rod, all that fun stuff. You go over to the other side here, there's a whole nother power steering gearbox over on this side with a whole nother pitman arm and drag link on this side. So know your truck, check it out. Whatever components are on there, they all have to be, good shape, no leaks, and functioning. Okay, so the next section here is section 11.3.2, the suspension. So we're going to be checking the springs, torque rods, stuff like that. Look for all missing, shifted, cracked, or broken leaf springs. Look for broken or distorted coil springs. The vehicle is equipped with torsion bars, torque arms, or other types of suspension components. Check that they are not damaged and mounted securely. If it's an air ride suspension, you should be checked for damage or for any leaks at that point. So this truck here has leaf springs up in the front. So whenever we're looking at our leaf springs, we want to look for any cracks or anything in the leaves. This truck here only has two leaves, the main and the wrapper right there. Everything looks good. You want to check all the way, the whole length of the spring. Make sure it's good. Check the shackles, make sure the bolts are in there, make sure the nuts are on there. Check the U-bolts that they're not broken. They look good on this side. I'll go over to the other side. Okay, so we're over on the other side, checking the leaf spring. Everything looks good here. U-bolt looks good. Leaves look good. The shackles look good. We have our mounting hardware. Bolts and everything look good. Remember, we have to check all the axles on here, all the suspension. So we'll go to the back at this point here. See here, this one has the little torsion arms that comes up. This one's air ride equipped, so it has airbags that we'll see here in a second. Then it has this torsion arm that comes up mounted here. We want to check the hardware on that, make sure everything looks good, make sure there's no cracks or any damage to that the best we can. Okay, we're at the back of our Freightliner here. You can see this one's air ride equipped, so we have this airbag bladder back here. So this here, we want to make sure there's no leaks or anything. Should have air in it at this point, so you should be able to not hear any leaks whatsoever coming out of there. Shouldn't be any big tears or rips about ready to blow out. Should be securely mounted. Check the bolt in the bottom, check the one up in the top. Everything should be mounted securely on that. Suspension components, we want to check everything front and back, make sure nothing's damaged whatsoever, make sure all the nuts, bolts, U-bolts, everything are good. Leaf springs, we have our front leaf springs. Some vehicles have back leaf springs or torsion bars. There's a bunch of different types of suspension. Make sure everything's in good shape. Another thing we want to check on our suspension is the shock absorbers. So most of our vehicles are going to have shock absorbers on the front here just to take a little bit of the shock out of there. So you see our shock absorber here. We want to make sure it's not rusted out. We want to make sure it's attached. Should be a bolt in the top and bottom there. And big thing we want to look for is make sure there's no oil dripping out of it. A lot of these have oil inside them to absorb some of the energy there. So once they go bad, oil starts to seep out of the seals inside there. When that happens, it's no good anymore, it has to be replaced. So that's what we want to check for. So check for rust, check for it's mounted, make sure there's no oil leaks out of it. What wants us to check is our slack adjusters and push rods. We're going to look for broken, loose, or missing parts. For manual slack adjusters, the brake push rod should not move more than 1 inch. We should not have any manual slack adjusters. So here's our automatic slack adjuster down here. We want to make sure all the pins are in there, make sure there's cotter pins within the pins. Make sure everything looks pretty decent. You can see these pins go through. This style here is 2 pins, 1 pin here, 1 pin here. Make sure it has the cotter pins inside there. Make sure our clip's down there where it's securely mounted. Make sure our brake chamber and everything looks like it's in pretty decent condition there, not routed out or anything. We want to check our brake hoses. Again, grab a hold of them. We shouldn't have any cracks or leaks or anything in our brake hoses there. Any leaks we should have found already when we stepped on our brake pedal. But, just check the condition, make sure it's not going to blow out. Next, we want to check our brake drums. So it's a little hard to see in these, especially if they have the backing plates on them like this one does here. So we just want to, wherever we can see a spot to look in there, so maybe through the wheels here or something, we just want to check our brake drums, make sure there's no cracks or anything. In a minute, I'll show you on another axle where it's out in the open where we can see a little bit better what we're checking for. Next, we want to check our brake linings, wherever we could see them. Some of them have a little access hole that you can see in there. I'll turn on my little flashlight, but we still probably won't be able to see in there too good. You can see the little access hole right there. We looked in there, we'd be able to see our little brake linings, make sure they're not worn out. Again, you want to be prepared to do this on all axles. The inspector might just have you do this stuff on one axle, or it might have you go all the way around and check them all out. Let's go over to one of our axles here in the shop and show you what we were looking at. Okay, so here you see we have an axle that's right out of the truck. We're going to kind of see what's going on. So what we're doing, when it's on the vehicle, we're checking for any cracks or anything in our brake drum here. And we're checking our shoes on the inside. This one here doesn't have any back panels on it. So you can see the brake shoes when we go through here. Some of our linings are going to have little wear indicators on them. There's a couple different styles. You can see that this one here has kind of an angled piece here. When it goes down to where the angle stops right there, there's an up and down part. That's where it's worn out at. So the angle part means it's good. Down here, it's a 1/4 inch, needs to be changed out. Over on the other side, we have a different brand of shoe here. This one here, you can see there's a little ledge right here on the shoe itself. So the top portion there, if there's a top portion on there, it's good. The bottom portion, if it gets worn down to that, it's only a 1/4 inch, needs to be replaced. So whenever we're looking at our brakes, we're looking in the little holes there, inspection holes the best we can, and we're checking the thickness of our brake shoes there. Inspector might ask you to check the back brake components. Same idea, same components back there, slack adjuster, drums, shoes, brake chamber, hoses. So check all that out, but usually they don't make you crawl underneath. So they might ask you about them. It's the same components, but you have a built-in parking brake. The back brake components will be pretty much the same, except on the back part, we'll have a built-in parking brake, so the brake chamber will look a little bit different. Instead of just being the skinny little front part that we see on the front axle, we'll have this back portion on there too that has that spring inside there for our parking brake. For a good review, I would suggest checking out my brake video. Shows the brakes and disassembly of the brake chamber and all that stuff really good, all the components of it. So I would definitely study that too for your test. The wheels, we want to check the rims, check for damaged or bent rims, and make sure there's no welded stuff onto the rims at all. So wheels, rims, basically the same thing. This whole thing's a wheel. Technically the rim's just this outer part of it here, but we're going to check the whole wheel assembly right here. We're not checking the tire at this point, we're just checking the wheel assembly. Want to make sure there's no cracks or anything, make sure everything looks pretty good. Again, he might just have you check one wheel or check them all. Make sure you check the outside of it and the inside of it. Make sure it's all in good condition. Okay, so next component we want to check is our tires. With our tires here, we want to make sure they're all in good condition. We want to check for cuts and gouges in the sidewalls, stuff like that. And in the tread, big thing we want to check is our tread, make sure it's not worn down. If it's worn down too much, not only is it illegal, but it's unsafe. So 430 seconds on the steer axle is the maximum amount of wear. On the back is 230 seconds. So to check that, we use an actual tread depth gauge here. Use a tread depth gauge, push this part all the way down, put it in the tire here, slide it down. Now we'll be able to see the number on there. This one's 1630 seconds. And remember, we can't have less than 430 seconds on the front, which is quite worn out. So realistically, whenever we check tires, we check them in a couple adjacent grooves there. So that one's 1630 seconds also. So that's good. We go back to the back tire. It's a little different tread design, but same idea. So back tires, we're allowed to have down to 230 seconds, but these are at 1830 seconds. Remember, you want to check the inside and outside tire for that. So that's the depth of it. We also want to check the pressure of it. Okay, other thing we want to check is our tire pressure. Use an actual tire pressure gauge. Don't just kick the tires. If you kick the tires, the inspector won't like that. Use an actual tire pressure gauge. You should all know how to do that at this point. Put it on the valve stem, should come out, tell you what your tire pressure is. If it's not marked in the door jamb what the recommended tire pressure is, you can look on the sidewall of the tire, and it'll tell you the maximum amount of pressure that could be inside there. This one's 90 PSI, cold. Check on our tires. They all need to have valve stem caps on them. So check our valve stems, make sure it has a cap on it. Could either be a regular cap or a flow through cap type, but make sure there's one on every valve stem. Okay, next we'll go into our lug nuts. We want to check all our lug nuts. Definitely make sure they're all on there. You want to make sure they're tight. You don't have to literally grab each one. Usually if you have a loose lug nut, you'll start to see little rust streaks coming out of it there, where you can see where it's shifting around a lot. So this one here has a little bit of wear there, where you could see a little paint off of there, but that's just from when I put it on there last. If it's actually loose, moving around, you'll see it all the way around the lug nut here. One thing I didn't mention, the inspector probably won't call you out on it, but DOT standards is there should be always two threads showing at least on any bolt on the vehicle here. So if these were the wrong lug nuts or wrong studs on there, and the nuts were out here past the studs, that would be illegal and shouldn't be on there. So make sure there's at least two threads showing on every bolt on a vehicle. There's spacers for Bud wheels or Dayton wheels. Most of our stuff's going to be hub pilot, so we don't have to worry about that. Check all the wheels, tires, stuff on that, on all the axles if the inspector wants you to. Next, we go to our side of vehicle inspection. This is 11.3.5. First, we're going to check the doors and mirrors. Check the doors are not damaged. They open and close properly from the outside. Hinges should be secure. The seal's intact. And check the mirrors and mirror brackets for damage, mounted. Make sure everything's loose and or not loose and it's gonna fall off there on here. So again, don't be afraid to grab a hold of stuff, move it around a little bit. Just make sure you don't put your mirrors out of adjustment. So the door closes, make sure that's secured. Make sure the instructor's not going to fall out as he's doing the road test with you. Check both sides, make sure everything works properly. Next, we'll go to the fuel tank. You want to check our fuel tank, make sure that's secured. Make sure that the tank's caps on there. Make sure the straps are on there. Make sure it's not going to fall off going down the road on you. Check for any leaks and stuff underneath. If you could access any fuel lines, make sure they're not leaking or anything. Next is the battery box. So wherever it's located, see that the batteries are secured, connections are tight and secured. So we'll go over on the other side of the truck for this one. Okay, so it's a little hard to see on this vehicle here because the actual battery box you have to disassemble here, but we can look in here and see our batteries in there, give it kind of a visual inspection. If you have a flashlight, check it out inside there. All our connections should be clean, tight, look good. Our battery shouldn't be moving around at all. Our box should be secured. This one's built into the step, so we already climbed in and out a few times, so we know it's nice and secured. But sometimes the battery box is mounted someplace else, so don't be afraid to grab a hold of it. Make sure it doesn't move around on you. It has an actual battery box cover. Make sure that's on there and everything is functional. Okay, our next thing here is our drive shaft. It's a little hard to see without getting down underneath there a little bit. But when I inspect the drive shaft underneath there, make sure you don't see any obvious cracks. Make sure the couplings and everything, the U-joints and stuff aren't ready to fall out of there. Make sure there's no foreign objects or anything wrapped up around there. So again, you probably want a flashlight. Check that out a little bit. Next is our exhaust system. Since we're down here anyways. So our exhaust system, here's the muffler here. You want to make sure it's nice secured, not ready to fall off of there or anything. We don't want to make sure there's a lot of, soot or anything coming out. Make sure everything's nice and tight. Check it underneath the hood too, where it comes out of the turbo, or out of the exhaust manifold if it doesn't have a turbo. Make sure everything looks good. Make sure you don't see any exhaust leaks anywhere. Okay, everything looks good on that. Next is our frame. Basically, we just want to check our frame and cross members. Any part of the frame we could see. So a little easier on a regular tractor trailer truck. We can see the frame a little bit easier. But on here, we want to kind of just look underneath. Check our frame components. Make sure everything looks good. Make sure the body's secured. Everything like that. Any components that look worn or anything like that, make a note of. So basically go around the whole vehicle, checking out the frame wherever you could see it at. Up in the front, you can see it pretty good. The frame components, you want to check how everything's bolted to it. There shouldn't be anything welded to the frame. Everything should be bolted onto it. That's just a factory weld. This is the back of the vehicle. You want to make sure everything looks good. Our mud flaps, rear fenders, all that kind of stuff look good on there. If it has any, cargo doors or anything like that, make sure they're all functional, secured. If it has a lift gauge or anything, make sure that's functional. Looks good on there. If it has a hitch or anything on the back, you'd also check that at this point. The coupling system on the back. It's actually another section. Section 11.3.7 will be the tractor coupling. All this one has here is a fifth wheel ball. Coupling inspection and stuff on the other video. This one doesn't have much, doesn't have a pintle hook or anything, just has the ball down in there for the gooseneck. So just inspect that, check the D-rings and stuff, make sure they look good. Okay, everything looks good on this one. Okay, so that's all for our little inspection here. Just use this video for guidelines and kind of what to check out, kind of, as a review. But always make sure you get the most updated manual here. Best to go online and get the most updated one. This one's from just a couple months ago, so I know this one was good. And review all the steps before you go take your road test.